Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse learners. Featuring Peggy Ployhar from SPED Homeschool, Annie Yorty from AnnieYorty.com, Leilani Melendez from Living with Eve, Stephanie Buckwalter from eLARP Learning, and Dawn Jackson from Dawn Jackson Educational Consulting and Tutoring. With over 75 years of combined homeschooling expertise, experiences, and perspectives, this group is eager to share their wealth of wisdom to empower your homeschooling journey. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and get ready for insightful discussions, valuable insights, and practical tips. Give your homeschool the power boost it needs to successfully educate the unique learners in your home.
Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. I'm your host, Peggy Ployhar, and the founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool. Each week, we bring you expert insights and practical strategies to help you homeschool your unique learner with confidence. Today, we're diving into a fascinating topic of how neurodevelopmental movements can help children build strong foundations for learning success. Many parents struggle to find effective ways to support their child's focus, coordination, and overall development. But what if simple natural movements can make a profound difference? Joining me is Sonia Story, creator of the Brain and Sensory Foundations program. Sonia has dedicated her career to teaching parents, educators, and therapists how innate rhythmic movements, primitive reflex integration, and postural reflexes can improve sensory processing, overall learning, and well-being. Her work has been featured in multiple books, and she has trained extensively with leading experts in the neurodevelopmental movement arena. I'm excited to dive into this conversation with Sonia and explore how these powerful techniques can help children thrive. Let's get started. Welcome, Sonia.
Well, thank you so much. I am super happy to be here, and I want to thank you, Peggy, for everything you've done to bring this event to its live state and to all the listeners.
Absolutely. Yes, you've been on the show before, and it's been a while, and I am just so excited about the work that you do, and I know the before and after that families experience when they work with you is life-changing. And so definitely, if you're just popping in for this conversation, stay a while. This is one you want to hear. But Sonia, as we get started, I would just love for you to give us a little bit of your background. And introduce yourself just a little bit more than what I shared in the intro.
Sure. Well, I got into this out of desperate need. And it was just so much fun, when you were just saying, stay a while, stay for the whole conversation. I got one little piece of this at the beginning through a book, and I just kept being more and more fascinated. I fell in love with not only these movements, but what they could do for us and for our children. And the way I fell in love with it was through direct experience. And I first started in my own body, and I was like, wow, I'm feeling a difference here. And then I started with our two children, and that's where the desperation comes in, because I was a young homeschooling mom, and our first daughter tended to be more hypersensitive. She had had a traumatic birth, and she had some hypersensitivities left over from that, which I didn't realize until I got into this work, really what we were dealing with. And I just knew she was very sensitive. And then our second daughter had a very stressful womb life because I had some issues that were very stressful at the time. And so she tended to be more hyperactive. So I had one very hypersensitive, one very hyperactive, and then I had my own challenges left over from my early childhood. And the mix just did not work. I'm telling you, I was in tears a lot, way more than I ever expected to be becoming a mom. And my daughters were fighting with each other, I was teaching them things like nonviolent communication, which is a great set of tools, but it really doesn't work when you're so triggered that you're in that mode of just fight or flight, and you can't access those tools where you say, okay, I'm going to say it this way, and I'm going to, it didn't work.
Right.
And what
Yeah.
I realized, yeah, what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
realized
No, I
afterwards
was
was,
there at one time with you.
mhm. Well, I realized afterwards, once I understood this work, that what we needed to change the nervous system itself. And when I started using these movements, also, by the way, I should just say, one day I was yelling at my children for yelling, which I think I've shared with you before. And I just thought,
Uh,
wow, I'm so off track. And I was so praying for a solution. And I was also praying for work that I could do that would allow me to help others and would be something that I could um, utilize my skills, that was good for my skill set. And
right.
it didn't come for a long time because I was a mother and that was my main focus. But then I was in my early 40s. I was actually kind of an older mother when we had our last child. And so I was in my early 40s when I found this work, and um, in a deeper way. I had actually, a couple years prior, just got a few little things out of a book that were what did help us. I can actually share one right now. We did this position where some people may be familiar, but the thumbs go down, the arms cross, and we do this.
Yeah. You
And we,
go through. Hmm.
that was the thing that saved my kids from so many fights. I couldn't believe it. And so
Wow.
we made a rule that we were going to do that if ever things got intense, or someone was raising their voice, or someone got out off track, then we would sit and do that. And I said we have to do it for a minute, and we have to do it in silence, and then we can talk about it. And it just changed everything. Usually after
Wow.
a minute, they just went off and played. So that was the first thing I learned, and then I really wanted to learn more. So then later, when I was in a position where I could go to classes, our youngest was by then 6 or 7. No, she was 6. I started doing all this work for myself, and I realized, wow, this is amazing. Because see, I had low level anxiety and overwhelm that was
Mm.
just constant. I just didn't know any different. It was my
Right. Yeah,
default mode.
exactly.
Yeah, and I didn't realize there was another way to be. I just
Right.
realized, like, that I was struggling, and I was um I didn't know that my nervous system itself was not fully functioning well. And
Right.
when I did these movements, I did them very consistently every day or every other day, but mostly every day for 4 months. And at the end of that 4 months, I just could not believe how I thought to myself, this is how God means us to live. Because
Right.
I was spontaneously joyful. I had always had to work to be positive, but I became much more spontaneously joyful. I could be much more of the kind of parent that I wanted to be, like going with the flow and not being overreactive and not being too controlling and that kind of thing. And
Right.
my family was very grateful that I did it. And then we saw that it immensely helped our children,
Yeah.
and my anxiety went away. I actually, my whole visual perception changed. I used to, like, not be able to
Kind of
see
like
as
tunnel vision
clearly,
almost.
and I couldn't.
Yeah.
I had kind of like a literal tunnel vision, which actually does come from different stress and trauma that we've had. And
Well,
I was so delighted. I would, you know how you see a toddler like walking around and like discovering different things? I was
right.
like
Yeah.
that. And
Wow.
of course, different stresses come, and then you have to sort of reset. But it was
Right.
so much fun. And I just thought, wow. And then I was working with my own children. I was working with other clients, mostly school age kids. And I thought, wow, parents really need this. And so I figured I would um, teach parents.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I knew that I needed a lot more training, and I ended up um, taking over 50 workshops in neurodevelopmental
Wow.
movement, and I just couldn't get enough. And I still study it, and I still do it. And
Yeah.
it's, to me, it's the biggest gift. And I just want everyone to know about it. And that's why I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for these kinds of things that you're setting up, because they allow us to talk about it in a deeper way. Because once people
Right.
understand it, they say, wow, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, yeah, I love your story. I think a lot of our listeners can really relate with you. We've had shows recently a lot on the nervous system and
Mhm.
it being out of whack, how stress and in utero things can cause nervous system issues in our kids, that we can pass those along. Things that I think people are just starting to really understand why we're so out of whack, and and why we need things like what you're going to be talking about today. But you're coming from a place of understanding, and not just a professional understanding, but from a place where been there, done that. I get you, and I want to help because this has helped me, which
Yes.
is so practical, and also gives hope to parents out there that are going, I don't know what to do anymore. And I remember being in that place. I had anger issues with my kids, and I don't exactly know, the method. I know God helped a lot in that process.
Yes.
But for me, movement has been a healing thing too, just because of all the aerial things that I do. I find that is my happy place, and I come home happier than ever every time I'm at the studio. So
Yeah. I,
it
I
does.
really
It
think
really
we,
helps.
yeah. And I think that we are led to find the tools that are going to work for us. And this was so much what I needed. And
Yeah.
it turns out a lot of people need this, because there are a lot of things that really disrupt the natural way that we are supposed to function.
Right.
And so, and I feel so, gosh, my heart would just break when I worked with these kids, because I saw that they were so big hearted and so sweet, and they just could not function well. And
Right.
some of them so smart, but they had, you know, what we're going to get into here with, they had the unintegrated primitive reflexes, along with other neurodevelopmental movements that just were hindering them um,
Right.
from their full potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would love for you to talk about what are neurodevelopmental movements and why they're so important for learning and development.
Yeah. Well, I know I created
Yep.
a
You got
presentation. Are you
Yep, I
okay?
will pull that up for you.
Okay, wonderful. And then do you make the slides go
I can
when
move
you're
them
in?
for you. Yes.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
great. Okay, well, so that's a little bit of my background, which we already talked about.
Yep.
And
Uh-huh.
I'm happy to provide these slides for anyone who wants them. But neurodevelopmental movements are innate. In other words, they're part of our intelligent human design. They
Mm.
are not something that I made up. They've been studied for hundreds of years, and they are, everything in our, I believe, everything in our creation has a purpose, and it was
Yes.
so amazing for me to study these movements, because I just kept seeing how perfect they are, and how elegant and how beautiful they are, to get us from the place of being a little baby in the womb to being able to come out during the birth and function in a way that's going to help us survive, protect us when we're vulnerable, get us moving so that we can nurse and do all the things that we need to do and feel all the things we need to feel to grow our brains and bodies. And they're just amazing. They weave into each other. They're like this beautiful web of um, movements that do so much. They're not just for I mean, obviously a baby has to be born, and so they do help with birth. Um, but they're automatic. They're part of our. That's why I said they're like hardwired into us. They're automatic in our brain stem. So it's not like the baby goes, "Oh, I'm going to stretch." No, the baby turns the head a little, and then the stretch happens automatically. That's the 18R reflex. That's the first picture up there on the left.
Okay.
Um, they're automatic. So God didn't leave these to chance. They're so important that they were wired into us from the beginning, not only to help birth, not only to help us become upright and walking and talking toddler, but to
Right.
provide the foundation for all of our future functioning. So just about nearly every skill depends on this foundation.
Wow.
And there's walking and then there's walking. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we take it for granted. I mean, less so now because so many children are having challenges. But
Right.
when I grew up, and I'm in my early 60s, it was nobody questioned whether you would walk or talk. You just walked and talked. Every just about everybody did, unless they were really serious um, medical handicaps and
Right.
challenges.
Yeah.
But now, you know, it's so tragic because there's so much disruption to these movements that when I say there's walking and there's walking, what I mean is there's walking that's aligned and comfortable and smooth and flowing and rhythmic. And then there's walking that has compensations where you don't see the arms swinging. Like if you
Right.
just watch your child walk across the room, notice if it's smooth and flowing, if the arms are swinging with the legs, because that's what the way human beings are designed is that we do all these rhythmic movements at the beginning of life, in the womb, during early infancy, and we have these things called primitive reflexes and postural reflexes. They're all automatic movements that every baby will do as long as they're healthy, as long as they're not stressed, as long as they have room to move. And they
Right.
get us going um, for all of our needs, not just in the moment as babies, but for our lifetime. They set us
Wow.
up to be able to learn, they set our brain um, to be able to be mature and our sensory systems. And then what I was starting to say is that when we walk, as long as we've had these movements and we're not walking with compensations and tension and weakness and fatigue, and we're walking with alignment and good posture and balance and coordination, that in itself activates our brain, it uplifts our
Wow.
mood, and it keeps us in a state of good, positive, outward flowing engagement with life. And so that's why I say we were designed to be
That's
doing rhythmic
amazing.
movements. But if we don't get this foundation, then even something that we consider simple is not so simple anymore.
Right.
Um, we have to compensate, and then we're not as joyful, we're not as effective. Learning is hard, all that stuff. So they're
Yeah.
crucial movements. They're so important, and that's why, um, like I said, God didn't leave this to chance. They're automatically wired into us.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
that's
that's a
that's what the
really good
neurodevelopmental movements
explanation.
are.
Yeah. So you created this program called the Brain and Sensory Foundations Program. And we're talking to homeschoolers primarily. I mean, other people do listen to our broadcast and podcast, but especially we're targeting parents who have children with learning challenges. How is what you're talking about helpful to them?
Yeah. Well, you can, this is a great slide actually, because if we didn't get what we were supposed to get in infancy with these movements, we have two very different outcomes with in terms of our foundation.
Hmm.
And so the way that it's helpful for homeschoolers is that it goes back to development to help development proceed if it was hindered. And
Okay.
when you help development proceed, when if it was hindered, you start getting more upright posture, you start getting more balance, you start uplifting your mood, you start being able to focus. You get the brain maturity that you were supposed to get. You get the sensory
Wow.
integration that you were supposed to get naturally. And that comes with it the ability to learn. See, all these things you see on the bullet points here on this slide: posture, core strength, balance, muscle development, sensory development, focus, speech, social, emotional skills, and learning. They're all dependent on this foundation. And that's why I show the
Wow.
babies in the top row, they're so much different looking than the ones in the bottom. The ones in the bottom are slumped. They don't have their core strength. They don't have
Right.
the ability to fully breathe um, and get
Yeah.
oxygen, the oxygen that they need. They don't have as much room for their internal organs, and their spine, the spine is curved. Well, the spine should be aligned, and um, it's going to be the more you grow from that infant state that wasn't fully set up, and
Right.
you gain weight, and you're expected to do things because you're older and you're tired. I even had I was reading an email the other day, and the woman said, my husband comes home from work and he's exhausted and he doesn't have any energy to do other things that he would love to do. And she's like, now that I'm in your course, I can see why.
Oh,
And
wow.
now she has the tools to do something about it. Go ahead to the next slide. I think
Sure.
I included um, okay, so we've already talked about why these are important.
Yes.
Um, and there's physical, social, emotional, cognitive challenges if we don't get them. Go to the next slide. I just
Okay.
want to see. Oh, and then this was my issue where I had things left over from infancy that never got completed, and I had anxiety. And there's research about that when
Wow.
children don't have these early movement skills, it leads to anxiety later on, and it's
Wow.
predictable. And so go to the next slide. I'm gonna
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to
That's
see.
fascinating.
Okay. Anyway, somewhere in there, there's a slide where it shows that when you're hopefully I put it in there,
Mm.
but I can always supply it later. When you're younger and you start gaining weight and growing older, I guess I didn't include it.
Oh,
I'm so
okay.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
I will put it in there, and then we can link to it. I'll send a link. But it
Okay.
shows that when you have this deficit where you're slumped as a baby, it just carries with you through your childhood, through teen, through adult, unless you know what to do about it and how to get back to development where you can rebuild the core strength. And it's not a perfect system. It's not you can't literally turn back the clock and become a baby again and go from that stage, but it's as
Right.
nearly perfect as we can get. And the reason why it's as nearly perfect as we can get is because we're replicating what was already created in
Okay.
our innate human design and function. So that's why it works so well, is because we're replicating things that were meant to do these jobs in the first place.
Got
So
it.
it is
That makes
very
a lot of
exciting.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. And it's nice to know that it's never too late. I think that's it's just hopeful for everyone,
It is
because
never too late.
yeah. hmm So let's just head to the next slide. So you talked about this, I think, already, and
Yes.
why they're important. And then I
Yeah.
would love to talk a little bit more about the anxiety. We see so many kids with anxiety issues, and I don't think we see the connection about that. And we tend to medicate it, or just say, that's all in your head. Breathe deeply. I think we put a lot of band-aids on things when
Sure.
we are in essence needing to go way back to the beginning, like you're talking about. And so I love that you bring this up and
Yes, and
share that.
we have more mental health therapists who are starting to be interested in this and to use it. And the ones that are using it are saying it's so helpful and life-changing for their clients, even
Wow.
for things like severe trauma and neglect. Um, it's phenomenal. And the reason is because this is the way humans are designed to um, mature out of states of anxiety. And I'm so glad you asked this
Wow.
question, Peggy, because there's actually a reflex. It's a primitive reflex, which is part of the neurodevelopmental movement system. And it's called the Moro reflex. And it's a startle response. And that is there for a really good reason. We need to have a way to alert the caregiver. I don't know if people can see me on this, but I think they can. If I go like this, you've seen the baby like shake and startle when,
Right.
some kind of sensory input comes in. Either they were jostled or they heard a loud noise, and they'll do this kind of thing. So if you're around infants, you'll see that, newborn infants. Ideally, this thing will happen because it's supposed to.
Right.
Um, and it will alert the caregiver. It will signal, cling on to the caregiver, and the caregiver, or the parent, mother, most likely, will hug the child, reassure the child, maybe rock them rhythmically, which is innate. And then they start to settle down and they go, okay, I'm safe. But if you are never able to get that response out of your body, then you're going to be constantly,
Wow.
um, to one degree or another, reacting to sensory input. That was my issue. I was
Wow.
hypersensitive because I had this underlying primitive reflex in my system that never went away.
Wow.
Um, and and these things, there's a spectrum, so it's not like an on-off switch. It could be like, oh, it's
Right.
partly integrated but not all the way, and so there can be mild to severe
Okay.
responses. But the thing is that if we do not integrate this primitive reflex, and that means it should be dormant at about the age of 2 months, four
Wow.
months at the latest. If it's not, and you carry that with you, it's such a problem because it
Wow.
keeps you in a state of fight or flight. Um, it keeps you easily startled. It keeps you irritable. You might have things like hypoglycemia because when you're in a fight or flight state, your body wants to burn glucose. It wants to burn sugar because
Yes.
that's what's going to get you able to flee if you're in danger. So if you think of an infant being in that really raw, vulnerable state, and you go,
Yes.
wow, and that's still there. I mean, I remember one little boy that I was working with, I think he was 8, and he said something like, when I'm in school, and this is not so much a homeschooler issue, but he said, when I'm in
Right.
school and our teacher gives an assignment, I can I can hear all the little taps of all the little pencils on the desks when I'm trying to write, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, that
And I mean,
hypersensitivity.
in a way, this could, like, if you're homeschooling, there could be lots of other kids around, lots of other things going on, and so one way or
Yes.
another, we have to be able to learn to filter sensory input, and
Hmm.
to function and to not get so irritable. The other thing about that moro is that it comes with adrenaline and cortisol because it's a survival and protection response.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so we know that that makes us more sensitive because when we're in an actual emergency, we need to be hyper vigilant, hypersensitive to see where the danger is. Do I have to fight?
Yeah.
Do I have to flee? What do I have to do? And but again, if it continues on, it really wreaks havoc
Mm.
in our ability to function. And
Absolutely. Yeah, because you
so,
can't stay in that and really live live a life. You're just constantly reacting all the time.
yes, and I my heart went out to you when you said you had anger issues as a parent. I did too,
Yeah.
because I had this hypersensitivity, hypervigilance.
Hmm.
Uh, oh, I was so ashamed and guilty, and I hope parents, um, I hope parents can really give themselves so much love and compassion about that
Right.
because it is hard. But that's
Hmm.
why it's so great because when we do these movements for our children, we also need to learn them ourselves. And then we get
Absolutely.
these benefits also.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. So thank you for sharing about that because yes, I go back to I had a traumatic birth and then my middle child who is now suffering from PTSD had a traumatic birth. And you can see there is that added level of inability to really to do anything because you are in that reactionary mode all the time. And so yeah, that anxiety is it's tough. And so I'm glad there's people out there like you that not only helping parents but also educating, therapists and other people that
Yes,
can
it
do these
is really
movements.
important. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked about anxiety. You know, that's what we're doing here. We're helping with anxiety, overwhelm, sensory issues.
Hmm.
Balance is one of the most important sensory um, modality. It actually there's research showing that when, and this is for all ages, children and adults, when our balance is poor, we're much more likely to have anxiety. And it's
Wow.
fascinating research. So if we can improve the balance, and there's research about this too, when we improve the balance, the anxiety levels drop to normal. And
That's
uh,
amazing.
isn't it? It's actually simple and fun
Hmm.
to work on your balance.
Oh
um,
yeah.
uh, yeah. And anyway, so it can address learning challenges. And there are specific reasons. Like, for example, we know children with reading challenges often have a hard time tracking the print, the line
Yes.
of print.
That's a pretty common one we get
Hmm.
for questions. Mm.
Well, these neurodevelopmental movements, so there are primitive and postural reflexes, there's also innate rhythmic movements. They and there's developmental movements, and there are others, but those are the main ones that we work with. And they mature the brain, and especially the lower parts of the brain, which are the areas that when you're an infant, those lower parts really have to get mature because they set up the functioning. They literally build networks into the higher brain centers. That's why we
Oh,
don't
wow.
expect an infant to like manage their emotions. We don't expect
Right.
them to have executive functioning skills yet.
Yes.
And they by definition, a toddler has what we would sort of term as ADHD. They're impulsive. They can be hyperactive. They can be
Right.
interruptive. They're not going to sit and focus. But we're meant to go through that developmental stage, but we're supposed to grow out of it. And
Right.
we have to have brain maturity to do that. So let me tie this back into
Got
the
it.
eye movements and the line of print. When
Yeah.
we um, when we develop the brainstem and the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, that links up to the higher brain centers. That develops those pathways so that we can focus, so that we can control our impulses, so that we have our executive functioning skills, so that we can communicate, solve problems, but
Hmm.
also there are direct links from these lower brain centers to the eye movement centers of the cortex.
Oh,
And so when you start doing, especially the rhythmic movements that especially help the cerebellum, it not only promotes focus and good sensory processing, but it allows the eyes to move smoothly over a line of print. So
it's
we've seen
amazing.
even just a few minutes of day, and there's research about this now, a few minutes of day of just rhythmic movements that are really soothing. Kids love them for the most part. Some kids are hypersensitive, and then we have a special thing to help them get to that point.
Got
But
it.
most kids love them and will ask for more of these rhythmic movements. And then they start reading better. Like their
Wow.
reading fluency goes up. They found that with a group of kids, this was a study out of New Zealand, they gave the kids rhythmic movements um, at school for, um, I think it was 5 minutes a day. It was either 4 or 5. I'm pretty sure they gave them 4 movements for 5 minutes a day. It might have been 5 minutes for 4 minutes a day, but
Okay.
because there's 2 studies actually. One was done by, but I get them mixed up. But in any case, it was a very small amount, but as long as they got it 4 days a week, their reading scores improved. And they
Wow.
were able to start integrating these reflexes. And that's the other thing is
Mm.
that when you do these really soothing rhythmic movements, they help. They're the first step in helping integrate the moral reflex that I talked about before, the startle. So
Wow.
it's phenomenal. I get
It's
very
amazing.
excited talking about this.
Yeah, well, that's good. You
Yeah.
you gotta be excited about what you do, because if you aren't, then, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
So
And
I
there's a
know.
lot of research too that you talked about this research, but just more and more research that backs up all of these different movements and things that you use.
Yes, and there is a body of research that's at least 5 decades long, showing maybe 6, maybe more, showing that when we have deficits in these neurodevelopmental movements, in other words, we can tell that they weren't completed. There's ways that you can tell that just by watching and checking for things. But when they're not completed, it's associated with physical challenges such as balance and coordination, gross motor deficits, fine motor deficits, abnormal walking gait, which we talked about before, the importance of a smooth, aligned,
Right.
balanced walk, and then visual motor skill deficits, which is what we were just talking about. The eyes need to work together and they need to be able to work smoothly and efficiently. And these movements are how you get there. That's how we're designed for your vision to develop. And then if you
Yeah.
go to the next slide, you can see that not only it's physical challenges, but also a lot of research about how there are social emotional challenges and mental health challenges. And here's
Wow.
the thing that I
Mm.
especially want to share with homeschooling families is that this can be very joyful to do for the whole family
Yes.
because all the kids need it. They do. And the adults need it because we live
Right.
in a time and place that is very stressful. I mean, we have all kinds of things going against us, which is why I don't want parents to feel guilty about anything, because it's just so hard right now. There are so many toxins in our world,
Yes.
plastics, pesticides, herbicides, there's
Yeah.
electromagnetic radiation, all these things
Yeah.
potentially can get in the way of our functioning. Um, there's just so many things. And, at the same time, we have doctors telling us to put our babies to sleep on their backs, which is not how
Right.
babies were naturally developed to sleep.
Right.
Um, And so there, there's a lot of people trying to speak out like, hey, we might be putting kids on the back for one reason, but is that a good idea? Because we're missing out on all this development that comes when they're
Right.
able to sleep on their bellies. So
Hmm.
that's worth looking into more. And if anyone wants resources on that, I'll be happy to share. Um, but yeah, so there's so much in our world right now, the screens, the work requirements that families have to do just to get by, and especially like
Right.
we're a homeschooling family for many years, and um, having one income, that's
Yeah.
pretty. That can, usually a lot of times there's just one income, and I don't ever regret doing it because I really wanted to be there with my kids.
Right.
But there's just so much um, that can get in the way of proper development. Like for me, my doctor said,
Absolutely.
don't put your baby on your belly to sleep, and I thought that was what I was supposed to do. So,
Right. Yeah. I didn't listen to
yeah,
them. All my kids slept on their stomachs, but
and I bet they
that
slept
was
much more peacefully.
they did. Yes.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's actually how it's meant to be, but, yeah, I'm glad that
Yeah.
your kids got that. I'm so
I know. We
glad
were,
because it really does
yeah.
that provides them with core strength to be on their bellies, and it gives them, so much more input because the limbs have something to push against. If you're
Oh,
on your back,
yes.
your limbs have nothing to push against, and you miss out on so much development, um,
Wow.
when you don't have that time in prone. So that's
Right.
good for you.
That's that that was just something I needed sleep, so I was like, they're not sleeping on their backs. We're going to the front just because 'cause they're happier and I feel better.
Yeah,
So,
it's so
yeah.
good that you had that awareness. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to bring that knowledge back. But anyway, we showed how this is associated with social emotional, but also cognitive. There's research, people can
Wow.
look this research up that if you have these unintegrated primitive reflexes, which are part of the neurodevelopmental movements, you can have reading, writing, math, and developmental language challenges. Peggy,
Wow.
just go back to that one slide, just the one before. So, no, sorry, it was just the one slide before. Um, okay, stop there. So, I just want to point out this study, which is why I said, everybody in the family should be doing this because in a study of 120 apparently healthy children ages 3 to 8 without a neurological disability, this was in Spain, 89.5% had incomplete neurodevelopmental movements. That's
Wow.
a lot.
That
And
is a
it may be
lot.
even more in this country.
Hmm.
Another study I read came out of the UK. Again, it was 120 school age children. I think it was 4 to 8 in this other study. Out of those 120, only 3 showed no motor abnormalities. So even the
Wow.
kids who are college bound, they're working at grade level or above,
Mhm.
they very often have these underlying glitches. It's just that you don't see it in the academic realm. That was
Right.
actually the case with our 2 children, and thank God I was homeschooling because if they were just in a school system, they would have never gotten this because they were working at grade level fine, but they
Mm.
had hypersensitivity, hyperactivity. They had, I'm sure that our youngest daughter would have been the kid that they said, "You need to put this child on medication," because she would literally
Right.
just be she was nonstop, mile a minute. She wanted something new to do every 2 to 5 minutes. And she
Wow.
was constantly moving and talking the entire time. It was just amazing. I mean,
Oh.
so, uh, yeah, I mean, it was, uh, she would have been I could have easily gotten her an ADHD diagnosis
Wow.
in about 5 minutes. And
Hmm.
but the thing is that because they were working at grade level, they would have never been flagged for having, special needs. But so
Right.
all kids need this and can benefit because it helps with anxiety, it helps them be more efficient, it helps them with their goals, and it's really a beautiful system that way,
Yeah.
for everyone.
Yeah. Can you share some success stories? I'd love for you to be able to
Yes.
share some of those. I know you had a slide. Oh, I did
Yeah, let's
past it. No.
go here. So this one, go back just a little. I can share any of these slides. So
Okay.
here's one where this mom wrote this letter to me in 2008, and I love I love this story because this young boy, I actually got to work with him only once. His he had ADHD, um, and his tutor um, found out about my work, and she sponsored me to come to teach a class so that she could help this boy along with others. And I ended up going to her home and staying there while I was teaching the class. And she said, "See this closet door?" And she said, "This is where I teach Andy." And he wasn't trying to be bad, but he just somehow like fell into my closet door, and now it's off the hinges. He's just so wild, but he's like a bull in a china shop, but he can't help himself. He's a good kid. Oh, this kid was just precious. So I got to do a demonstration with Andy during the class that I was teaching, and I did a demonstration session. And he was so fun to work with. And he was a twin, and his goal was that he wanted to beat his brother at billiards. So we play
Ah,
acted that out, and then we did movements, and we just had a lot of fun with it. And so his tutor learned the movements. She taught his mom. His mom did them at home. And his mom wrote to me 4 months later. I think it was about 4.5 months later. And she wrote this most beautiful letter. You can read it online, but what she described was how he made gains in his academics. He had been behind almost 2 grades in academics, and
wow.
he had caught up, and he tested in grade level, um, except for one subject, which he was only 2 points off. But other than that, he'd been 1 to 2 years behind. He was testing at grade level, but he also made huge gains socially. She said he enjoys riding his bike now. He'll go out unprompted and just ride his bike. And she said it was a real time for them to bond. And so here you see when you
That's
do these
neat.
movements, this is what I love about this because it helps it helps with physical, social, emotional, and the cognitive and learning piece. So
Yes.
that's why I love it so much because it's not just about getting kids to succeed academically. It's about helping them feel comfortable in their body, helping them have the skills and the stamina to do what's meaningful for them,
Right.
and and connecting families in a way where there's less stress and more time for enjoyment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And um, yeah, and this family could have been working on these skills for a long time using other methods, just really trying to work with the what they were seeing versus what was causing it. And
Right,
so
and they had
going
been
back.
working on other methods. She said,
Yeah.
"We've tried everything, uh, before we found this,"
Wow.
and,
Yeah.
including medication, which, you know, It's anyway,
Yeah.
medications are really tough because it doesn't um, allow for other possibilities in some cases. And I know I have no judgment. I have no uh, sometimes it's the only thing that parents have. It's the only
Right.
thing that's been,
Yeah.
and sometimes it might be necessary on a temporary basis. But one of my messages, because I learned this from one of my teachers, was a psychiatrist, and he was a very unusual psychiatrist because he didn't prescribe medication for ADHD. He prescribed these movements,
Oh,
and
wow.
he so if you are going to embark on this and do these movements, it is important to know that if your child is on medication, that um, according to Dr. Blomberg, I'm not a doctor, I just do movement education, but according to Dr. Blomberg, who was a psychiatrist, he passed away in 2020, but
Hmm.
he said that what you want to do is work with the parents and the doctor, and gradually over time, once the child is getting more and more functional, then you
Right.
gradually reduce the medication. But
Okay.
he saw it all the time where he had kids who were on medication, and sometimes they'd been on medication for years, and
Wow.
he was able to get them off and they were functioning fine.
Hmm.
But it was through consistent movement. You do have to be consistent with it.
Right. Yeah. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your program, just what's involved with that, what kind of time commitment parents have, and just what's all involved with that.
Sure. Well, it is online, so it's very accessible. And we have a lot of support where we have Q&As, there's email support, phone support. We uh, give there's 8 sessions, and within those sessions there are lessons, and you just go through. You get a 100-page hard copy, beautifully color photos and directions, the wonderful spiral manual, and then you learn the movements as you go through. It's video training, so
Okay.
it's very um, helpful to have those videos because you can replay them. I used to
Right.
teach this in a intensive, like, weekend, 3-day weekend. But it was so interesting because when I was doing that, and I did that for years, it was more like OTs and PTs and educators were coming, special educators, but not very many parents. And then I realized, well, here are these parents on one income,
Right.
with probably multiple children, and it wasn't doable for them to get to a class. So way back
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
2012, I had a group of parents ask me to make an online class, and I did. And thank goodness, because it's working
Right.
out really well. Yeah. Um,
Good.
so the parents learn the lessons. It's not for the kids to watch with them, it's for them to do. It's their own time to learn, and then they practice the
Okay.
movements first, and
Hmm.
ideally in front of the kids, because then the kids can go, what are you doing? When they see the
Right.
parent, and you can say, I'm doing some care that helps me feel happier inside, or this helps take the tension out of my body, I'll give you a turn later when I have
Hmm.
time. And then they start to get curious and wonder about it, so then
Right.
they start introducing it with their kids, only in small amounts to begin with, because the movements are very powerful and we need to be able to see how the child responds. And that's actually really important because some kids are very sensitive and we have to do just little bits and then gradually work up. And
Okay.
other kids will melt right into it and love it right away from the beginning. But we do have a very we have what I call the roadmap to reflex integration. And it's like this flow chart. If your child responds this way, then you go to this step. And if they
Oh,
respond this way, you go to that step, because,
that's
and we're
great.
here also to support and help as you go along, but because it's so important to have something that's customizable and
Right.
individual,
Hmm.
because Not everybody
Yeah.
holds stress the same way. You
And you
know,
may have 2 kids, if you're using it for your whole family, that need a totally different approach, and
yes,
so but using the same thing, but maybe at
yes,
a slower speed
yes,
or yeah, so
exactly.
that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
So we have two levels in the curriculum, and the first level is about 18 hours of instruction time. And then, but you can start taking little chunks. Like even if you did the first hour, you'd already have great tools to start
Mm,
working with. You don't have to like finish the whole thing. And you have, depending on when you enroll, you have between 9 months and a year to complete. And
okay.
then if you want more time, you can do that. We just have a very reasonable like extension fee, but you get full support with that.
Okay.
And the other thing about it that I love, Peggy, is that, I've had parents come to me and saying, I've tried primitive reflex integration before, it didn't work. And I'll say, okay, first of all, I
Yeah.
have a little heartbreak when that happens, but I've heard it
Oh,
too many times now. Or
right.
I've tried something like this where, we did a bunch of crawling, but my child didn't like it. And I'll just be like, "Oh, no. Okay, wait, there's a
Mm,
different way to go about this. Please
right.
try it again, but do it with this way," because I learned a lot
Mm,
from a lot of different mentors, and also a lot of kids taught me what you're not gonna see in the manuals, like, "This kid's not
right.
doing it that way." And so, I put, like, the best of the best tools together and gave a system for like how to slowly and gradually work up to it and make it playful because it needs to be
Right.
fun. And
Absolutely.
there are other things built into it that take the stress out of goals, um, which is really important. So, those are things that are integrative movements that support the neurodevelopmental movements
Got
because,
it.
yeah. And so there are things where the parents stay motivated because they can see changes happening usually pretty quickly. Even like one woman told me she had two young girls with special needs, and she said just the first session of all of the 8 sessions of the first course, she said that was more impactful than anything I've ever done for my kids. And that
Wow.
was the first session
That
is
was the
all about the
first
rhythmic movements. So
right.
there's a brain tune up and then rhythmic movements in that first session. And then we go through each of the reflexes from there. There are, so that's the thing about
Right.
other primitive reflex integration approaches is that you really want to start with the rhythmic movements because they're calming and maturing. And remember, I
And
told you about the
yeah.
startle reflex and the fact that
Right.
that could leave you in a stressful state?
Yes.
Think of that in terms of muscle tension. So when we hold stress, our muscles are tense. When we have
Right.
unintegrated primitive reflexes, our muscles are weak, which also leads to muscle tension because we tense them up to compensate.
Right, so you're
Um,
doubling it up.
yes. And so
Wow.
when we start going in and stimulating these reflexes in order to integrate them, it can be uncomfortable. It can be a little
Right.
like, wow, what's going on here? It can be
Mm,
emotional. They're intense because they bring us right back to our most vulnerable state. So I learned after years of observing this and then asking other practitioners, "Hey, are you seeing this? And is this how you are going about it?" And they'd be like, "Oh, yes, that's how we do it because that's what I found too." So what
mm,
we do is we do the rhythmic movements first because they're calming and integrating and super powerful. Then you have more
got it.
brain, body, and sensory development. Then when you go in to stimulate reflexes, it's not so jarring and
Yes.
it's not going to
Hmm,
be so hard. Um, I remember talking to you earlier about how these movements, um, how they mature the brain. And one of the things that that brainstem does when it's mature is it um, modulates muscle tone. That's one of its jobs, but it can't do that job until it's mature.
Right.
So that's why when you start stimulating the brainstem and getting it more mature with the rhythmic movements, it will help um, with muscle tone, muscle strength. And then when you go to do the reflexes, it's much easier. So that when kids will
Got it.
resist things that are too hard, they're going
Oh,
to
yeah,
resist things. They're
absolutely.
going to find a way to say, no, I don't want to do that. So you
Yep,
have to make it easy for them at the beginning. You have to make it fun. And then they'll be willing to do more challenging things. And that's such a
absolutely.
beauty. The other thing I just want to share for the parents who have kids who are more on the hyperactive state, one of those brain or lower brain structures, it's like a cap over the brainstem, it's the basal ganglia. That has to be mature in order for the child to find the ability to be still.
Mm.
Um, that's the part of the brain that gets damaged in Parkinson's disease, and we have the tremoring going on.
Oh,
They're
wow.
not able to
Okay.
be that somebody who has that level of damage can't be
Hmm.
still, and they have tremors. And so it affects our movement and it affects our ability to be still and to focus. And you get
Mm,
that maturity through the rhythmic movements. And then you
mm.
have more function, you have more stillness, focus, muscle balance, muscle tone, muscle strength, and sensory development. And so once
Wow.
you have that, then you can go on to the reflexes. And from there, you can just weave that wonderful um, web of development.
Right.
All the movements intertwine and support one another.
Mm.
We learn them
Yeah.
linearly because we kind of have to because we're piecing this together. Um, eh,
Yeah.
they all work
But that's
together as a beautiful
fascinating.
system. It is. It's
Right.
so
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's
I guarantee that anyone who experiences these movements will fall in love with them. Maybe not to the
yeah.
extent because I became completely obsessed with them for so many years, and I still am. But you'll just fall in love with what they can do for you. And the other
Absolutely.
thing about other programs is that oftentimes they might give you like, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 primitive reflexes to work with, and that's good, but it's way better to do a fuller, more broad range because they do all work together and support one
Yeah,
another.
that's a great point to
Yeah, so we have
yeah.
11 primitive reflexes in our first level course, and then 11 more reflexes and early responses in our second level. So it's a very comprehensive. And actually,
Mhm.
um, Peggy, if you want to go to the last slide, I don't
Yep.
know how much more time we have, but
We're actually out of time, and
okay,
so
so
I'm
let
gonna
me
have
just
you wrap
quickly.
up here.
Yeah, okay. So I we have this free gift where you can get a chart that gives you a whole
Yep, and I'll
checklist.
share that link in the show notes for
Yeah,
those of
you
you
can share
listening.
that link where you can get a free gift and you can see all the different reflexes and responses that we share in our two classes, uh, the first level and the second level course. But and it'll show you like if this reflex is not integrated, here's what you might see in your child. So you can go down the
Okay.
checklist. It doesn't include the rhythmic movements, but that's just something to know that we have those rhythmic movements in the course.
Right.
Um, and so it's a great way to like stimulate your thinking, and a great way to kind of get started. But it is very important to get the full training and not just kind of piece it together on your own because you'll save so much time and you'll be successful early on, which is important for parents and children when you
Right,
get proper
especially as you
training.
were talking about kids could be getting discouraged or,
Yeah.
just getting overwhelmed, and that's so easy. It can happen so easily. So, yeah, definitely visit, Sonia's website. It is, let me pull up my banner here. It's moveplaythrive.com, and I also have the link in the show notes for you, and we'll have the link for that free gift. And also they've shared a coupon code with us, sped home 36, so you can save $36 off of their program by using that code. So thank you so much, Sonia. I know you are just a wealth of information and probably could talk all day on this topic, and you probably have in the past. And so I'm just delighted that you were able to share with us, and that you're just available for families to be able to get to the root, really, of why all these things that they see cropping up in their kids and themselves are going on, and that there is hope and there's solutions, and they're simple and they're easy and they're the way God made us. And we need to return to that instead of just trying to use a lot of other things to try to kind of cover it up, like the medications you were talking about and other things. So I'm just so thankful for you.
Yeah, it is such a gift to be able to share these movements. And thanks for your time and all your efforts, Peggy. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah. And I want to thank you all for tuning in today to our episode of Empowering Homeschool Conversations. If you're looking for more resources, support, and encouragement on your homeschooling journey, be sure to visit Homeschool Heroes, powered by SPED Homeschool. That's our site. At Homeschool Heroes, you'll find free downloads, a supportive community of parents, homeschool-friendly providers, and expert consultations that you are available to use, as well as a new test called the Mind Print test. And it does a cognitive test for your child and gives you teaching strategies on how to help them. You can also explore tools, products, and services designed to simplify your homeschooling efforts, all from our trusted nonprofit that understands the unique challenges of homeschooling children with learning differences. Just join us at spedhomeschool.com to find answers to your biggest homeschooling questions and develop your homeschool superpowers with our resources, inspirational articles, and a supportive community that's here for you all the way. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day. Next time, we are going to be talking about parenting with faith when your child hurts with our co-host, Stephanie Buckwalter will be doing that interview and talking about just walking your kids through faith through difficult times. And so we would love to have you join us back for that conversation. Till then, everybody, take care. God bless, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com